Atheists are one of the most politically active, quote unquote, religious groups in America. And guess what the church has always done? It's always elevated white guys to leadership positions.
Why are they dying?
That's the bazillion-dollar question I get asked probably like 3 times a week.
It's midterm season, which means it's once again that time when millions of Americans go to church with absolutely no intention of speaking to God. They're there to vote. Because in a lot of places in America, your local church is a polling place. Tomorrow night, the basement might have an AA meeting. Might be a daycare, a blood drive, a food pantry, a community dinner, and somewhere in that building, almost certainly, one of those enormous silver coffee urns that seems capable of surviving a direct nuclear strike. We think of churches primarily as religious institutions, which obviously they are. But in America, they've also become something much more mundane and in its own way, incredibly important. They're buildings where people just do stuff together. So here's a question I don't think we've spent nearly enough time asking. What happens when a church closes? Because a lot of them are closing. Americans have been drifting away from organized religion for decades. Younger Americans are much more likely to say they have no religion at all. And demographics may make this considerably more dramatic as the baby boom generation ages and congregations that have been limping along suddenly discover they no longer have enough people or enough money to keep the lights on. When most people hear that, they think, okay, this is a secularization story. Americans used to believe, now they don't. But as usual, it's more complicated than that. My guest today is Ryan Burge, a political scientist who studies religion and politics and who also spent nearly 18 years as a pastor, which means he's watched this transformation in 2 very different ways, in national data sets and also one Sunday morning at a time. I want to talk to him about who's actually leaving church, who's staying, whether the supposed religious revival is real, what happens to a town when the church building goes dark, and whether politics is starting to do some of the jobs that religion used to. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you have an unusual resume. You are both a political scientist and a pastor. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense even thinking back on it now, how those 2 things sort of happen in my life at the same time. But I grew up in the church, grew up in a Southern Baptist sort of evangelical church in rural Illinois, always involved in the church. I was a youth pastor for, it was supposed to be a 3-month deal, turned into a 3-year deal. And then when I was in grad school, I needed a part-time job and a local church needed a pastor. So that happened. And then I kept trying to get away from the ministry, kept calling me back. So all the way through grad school, I was pastoring 2 different churches. And even after I got my PhD, I was still pastoring a church. And I pastored a church for 17 and a half years here in my little town in rural Illinois. So I always tell people I feel like I have an unfair advantage because I don't just study religion and politics like an academic does, but I lived it. I mean, every single Sunday I saw the disaffiliation problem in America. I saw the shrinking Mainline. I saw the problem with rural churches in America. It was happening right in front of me. So, I think I can understand these questions maybe a little bit differently than other academics because I see it, from the pastoral side, from the not just the kind of cold academic perspective, but a lived experience that I've had my entire life.
So you're now a United Methodist, which is actually, I come from a mixed marriage. My mother grew up in the United Methodists. My father was Catholic. The United Methodist Church I remember going there as a kid and it was packed. You had to get there at 10 minutes to church time if you wanted to be sure you had a seat. And the church held, I think, about 400 people. And now they're at the point where a lot of churches are where they've got a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen congregants, and where you have to decide, do we keep this going? Because the irony of a lot of these churches, right, is that because they had so many bequests, a lot of them are quite well endowed.
Yep.
And then do you just keep running down the endowment, or do you close up and put the money to doing something else and kind of consolidate? You went through that at your own church.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through how that happened.
So my church had been around since 1868, one of the oldest churches in town. When I got there in 2006, we had about 50 people on a good Sunday. And at our peak, we were 350, like in the 1960s. So we were already down a tremendous amount. We were around 100 people in the mid-1990s, around to 50 people by the mid-2000s. And then, every year, people don't realize, like, how do you go from 50 to 10? The answer is really slowly. We didn't have like this big schism or breakup or, like a whole family left all at once. It was, a person died, a person moved away, a person changed churches. And all of a sudden by, kind of 2023, we were down to 10 or 12 on a good Sunday. And when you have 12 people in a sanctuary that seats 300 people comfortably, that just feels bad. It not only feels bad, it's like financially unsustainable. So we've been running, like you mentioned, on endowment. Money that people have been given in wills and bequests for 50 years. We're sitting in this fund and we're using that to pay the light bill, just to kind of keep things going. And we realized, we're going to run out of money. Actually, that was the thing. And I tell churches all the time, actually running out of money is a very good thing because it gives you a reason to close. Like having to choose to close is different than going, hey, the checking account's getting to zero and we can't pay the bills. So when we called it quits, we had about $15,000 in a checking account. That was really our last. We'd given our building away to a classical Christian school. We had really no assets at all except that liquid asset. And so when we closed down, it was pretty much either we close down now or close down in 6 months because the money's going to be gone either way. And I think that actually made it easier for everyone involved just to say, okay, I think we're at the right time to do this.
So you spend a lot of time looking at religion and data. What did that experience? Can you connect that experience to the data that you study?
Yeah, if you look at the long-term trends in American religion, they're clearly in the direction of non-religion. The share of Americans who are non-religious was 5% in 1991. Today, it's closer to 30%. Among Gen Z, it's closer to 45%. I was pastoring what we call a mainline church. So United Methodists, Episcopalians, American Baptists. Our church was American Baptist. Southern Baptists are evangelicals. We were American Baptist mainline. Those are the kind of churches that have been hurt the worst in America the last 30 years. The Episcopalians only have about 400,000 in worship on an average Sunday. So my church basically had everything going against it demographically speaking. It was a mainline church. They're not doing well. It was an older church. Obviously, older churches don't do well. We're in a community that has the same population today as it had 75 years ago. Again, that's not a good factor. And Christianity as a whole is declining in America. So you add all that stuff up, and it's almost amazing that more churches aren't closing on a week-to-week basis. We had everything against us. And I think my church is actually sort of like the tip of the spear. I think you're going to see thousands of churches like mine close over the next 5, 10, 20 years, especially, by the way, as the baby boomers die off. I don't think we fully realize how much boomers are propping up American religion right now. And the oldest boomers are 80. So they're not super long for this world. And who's going to replace them? The answer in a lot of these churches is no one.
This is a really common problem. And I would like you to trace for me why is the mainline getting hit the hardest? Because that was the mainstay of America for literally centuries. These are the churches from the Congregationalists and the Episcopalian Church. These are the churches where most Americans are going on most Sundays.
Yeah.
Why are they dying?
That's the bazillion-dollar question I get asked probably like
Sorry.
3 times a week. Why is the mainline in trouble? It is. Okay, so let's just talk numbers.
My listeners want to know.
The answer, I don't have a great answer. I'll try to give an answer, though. Okay, so the mainline in the 1950s were over half of Americans. Like in 1958, 52% of Americans were on the rolls of a mainline Protestant church. So United Methodist, Episcopalian, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, Presbyterian Church, USA, Disciples of Christ, United Church of Christ, American Baptist. Like these denominations ruled American life. Like by any objective metric, the most powerful people in America outside of politicians were mainline clergy. And now the mainline is a shadow of its former self. Today, the share of Americans who are mainline is 9%, so down from 52 to 9%. And among Gen Z and millennials, only 5% of them are mainline. So that means the mainline is going to have to drop from 9% probably down to 5%. So you're talking about a tradition that went from being half of America to 5% of America in really one lifespan in about 75 years. And that was the glue that held us together in many ways, because the mainline, now the current conception of the mainline, let me talk about that for a minute. The current conception of the mainline is it's a bunch of like Black Lives Matter flags and rainbow flags and LGBTQ and all this kind of stuff. And that is true at the clergy level. I've written about this a lot. At the clergy level, mainline clergy are liberal. That's a statistical numerical fact. You can't dispute it. At the laity level, though, at the pew level, the average mainline Protestant is a Republican. Because think about who they are. It's a bunch of like retired bankers living in the Midwest. Like white, old, educated, moneyed people are not Democrats by and large. And so that is the modal mainliner, and yet the narrative around the mainline is it's a bunch of like rainbow flag wearing social justice warriors, when that's only true in like specific churches in like major metropolitan areas. But I've go to United Methodist Church now. I've been there for 2 years. I think I might have heard one thing in 2 years that was vaguely political, just vaguely political in 2 years. The average mainliner is not being like inundated with like leftist politics every day. They're being told to love their neighbors as themselves, serve their community, be a good Christian, be a good father, mother, sister, brother, friend, whatever it is. And that's basically it. And yet they're being painted with this brush. Now, so why is this happened? I think one of the big reasons is the mainline. This is the theory that I like the most. N.J. Demrath wrote about this about 30 years ago. He makes this argument. The mainline failed because it succeeded. The average American did not believe in things like religious pluralism 100 years ago and individual rights, and the mainline convinced them to adopt these values. And when the average American adopted the values of mainline Christianity, it did not stand apart from the culture. And if it doesn't stand apart from the culture, you have no chance of survival, because people go, why would I go there when I already believe almost everything you believe? And I don't want to get up on Sunday morning and throw money in an offering plate and wear an itchy suit and do all that nonsense. I'll just go to the country club. So they actually, they're failing because they succeeded so much, and now they can't differentiate themselves from sort of like mainstream American culture.
Okay, so let me break that down a little bit for listeners, because I think the obvious question that a lot of people are going to have is to say, well, but they were also very much like with the culture 100 years ago, right? And in fact, our culture gets reflected in these churches. So the reason that there is a Southern Baptist and an American Baptist, the reason that there is a Southern Methodist and a United Methodist is the Civil War. And these institutions get riven by these big cultural events. But these are fundamentally mainstream institutions. They are very much associated with local power structures and so forth. And so it's not just right that they convinced people that they were too identified with the culture. It's that they convinced people of a value that it doesn't necessarily matter what you believe. That
Yes.
one belief is as good as another. Mm-hmm. And that once you have that, you can't hold a church together, would be my argument. But is that a fair argument?
I think it's the fact they lean into religious pluralism so strongly in opposition to what evangelicals are like. So here's how we think about evangelicalism, or at least here's how I think about evangelicalism. It's not declining, by the way. The share of Americans evangelical is 20% today. It was 20% 50 years ago. That's pretty good, considering the nuns have gone from 5% to 30%, to stay steady in that turbulent environment. And the reason they can do that, and this is sociologically speaking, evangelicals have got it figured out, because they did not fall into the trap of fundamentalism. So fundamentalism says, okay, we have all the right doctrines, all the right beliefs, all right everything, but we're going to go over in this corner and cloister ourselves over here. And you all, the rest of you, can quite literally go to hell, because we're just focused on our own personal piety, our communal piety. Evangelicals rejected that. They said, hey, we still need to engage with the culture. We still need to try to evangelize the culture. We still need to try to reach out to people. And that did two really important things. One, it obviously gave them a chance to convert people to evangelicalism, because that's in the name, for goodness sakes. But the other thing, which is a little bit harder to parse, is it helped create intergroup ties among the people that were already evangelical, because they were constantly reminded of why they were different than the mainstream culture. So you need that sort of like, the phrase you hear often in evangelical circles is be in the world, but not of the world. And I think actually sociologically, that's a brilliant phrase, because it's saying like, don't cloister yourselves, still engage with the culture, but rub up against the culture to create those friction points, to create what we call boundary maintenance and intergroup ties. And I think that's why evangelicals are doing so well, is because they've managed to still stand apart from the culture, yet not walk completely away from the culture. Meanwhile, mainliners have just been subsumed by mainstream culture.
So there's another argument that's therefore come ye out and be separate and touch not the unclean thing, as famously popularized in the great movie about the Amish, Witness, which I highly recommend to all the listeners. Yes. But I mean, there actually is, when you look at, for example, really fast growing groups in the US, right? Mm-hmm. Orthodox Jews, the Amish, mostly growing by raising new generations of Orthodox Jews and Amish. Mm-hmm. But they, one way to understand the Haredi, right, the ultra Orthodox, is as a reaction to the Enlightenment. They look at the Enlightenment and they realize that and this is something that like my Jewish friends wrestle with all the time and, debate and so forth, is that intermarriage and the ways in which what the rabbis of the 18th century realized is that as it became more possible for Jews to assimilate in an European culture that was liberalizing, that they were going to lose a lot of people unless they really rejected that culture. And also true of the Amish, right? Is you can't visibly blend in, that you have to that you can't kind of do it by inches. The minute you decide that you can't be half in and half out. You have a choice between very consciously rejecting the society you're in or staying in it. And, so we now have these three poles, I would argue, in American religion. You have the people who have consciously rejected that society and are actually thriving in many ways. Mm-hmm. They have their issues. You may not like the way they live, but the Amish are retaining like over 80% of their kids. Orthodox Jews, similar numbers is my understanding. You are the sociologist of religion, not me.
You're exactly right.
Political scientist studying religion, not me, but I think that number is right.
The argument you hear often is like the slippery slope argument in religious circles, right? Like if you let this happen, then that's going to happen, and that's going to like you're going to go down this path, and like everything that made you unique is going to go away. Evangelicals are interesting because if you look at like retention metrics, which to me, people ask me what the most important number is, it's retention. Like keeping your own is the only way for your tradition to survive 20, 30, 50 years in the future. Right. No other thing works except that. You can't convert your way out of a retention crisis. I don't care who you are. Conversion is incredibly rare in America. I think people need like to recognize that. So retention. Amish retention is 85%, which is insanely high. Like it's off the charts high. And like the average family, 6 kids per family, and they're retaining 80. Like there's these projection models say they're going to take over the entire state of Ohio in 50 years because of like fertility and retention. I don't believe that to be true, but here's what happens. A group like the Amish, you can maintain your identity when you're a certain number, but when you start getting larger and larger, it's harder to maintain those intergroup ties as strongly as you were. When you're 100,000 people, it's not that hard. When you're 1 million people, it's harder. And when you're 5 million, it's almost impossible. And the reason I know that is because look at what's going on with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I just wrote a piece about this.
Yes, it was a great piece. I just read it.
Thank you. Their retention rate now is 54%. So they're losing half their kids in a tradition that's very high intensity, right? Like 75% of people who grow up Latter-day Saint grow up going to church every week in the Latter-day Saint church. So they're not like mainliners, Episcopalians, like, let's just go on Christmas and Easter. They're putting kids in the pews every single Sunday, and still half of them walk away. And I think one of the reasons is because they got so big. There's 7 million people in America now. So I think this is the problem these smaller groups have that they're going to face as they get larger, is those intergroup ties. That consistency is not going to be able to maintain as that identity. Evangelicals live in this space between those two groups, by the way. They're not 54% and they're not 85%. Evangelical retention is somewhere between 65 and 70%, which actually I think is pretty healthy, because it means like they're engaging with the world enough and they're not creating this very like strong boundaries that people can leave, but most people stay. Like 2/3 of them stick around. That is a very good metric considering how large they are as well. So I think in many ways, like evangelicalism isn't, now if the number keeps going down in the future, like you got to really evaluate things. But the way it stands right now, I think evangelicalism is the most healthy, large religious tradition in America.
And yet you are a United Methodist.
Well, I go to a United Methodist church. Just so you all know, my wife's Catholic. Both my kids are baptized Catholic. My oldest son was just confirmed in the Catholic Church in February. He just got back from a Steubenville conference in Missouri. There are people online who think I hate the Catholic Church. I go to Mass more than the average Catholic does. So my Sunday morning, I go to United Methodist for an hour. Then I go to the back half of Mass with my family because it starts on the half hour. So I drive 4 blocks away and go to Mass. I think Catholicism is interesting for all kinds of reasons, which we can go down this whole rabbit hole.
Yes, please. Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So Catholics are fascinating because there's a lot of them. There's 65 million Catholics in America.
I ultimately joined the Catholic Church, by the way. So
that's weird. You're statistically an odd duck. I'm just going to be dead honest with you right now. You and JD Vance are weirdos. So welcome to the weirdo club. 1.5% of Americans are converts to Catholicism. 19 out of 20 Catholics are cradle Catholics. There are actually probably more Jews in America than there are converts to Catholicism. So it's a very rare. The Catholic Church is not big on conversion. Like they're not evangelical, like in that sense of like proselytizing. So how does the Catholic Church maintain itself? Retention, retention, retention is the only way for the church to maintain itself if you're not going to bring new people in. And the data says they're not very good at that. You know, every generation of Catholics is less likely to go to mass than the prior generation of Catholics. And now only 23% of Catholics are actually weekly mass attenders when it was 50% of Catholics back in the 1970s. So like the top number looks good in American Catholicism, still 65 million, still over 20% of Americans, all those things. But once you dig below the surface, what you find is that most people who are Catholic are not religiously Catholic. They're not going to mass more than once or twice a year. They're just Catholic because they were Irish American or Italian American or Hispanic. So it's almost become, and please don't cancel me for saying this, it's almost become like Judaism in a way, where it's like it's got like a hereditary component to it and a religious component to it at the same time. And that religious component is waning while the hereditary component is gaining amongst the next generation. So they don't understand Catholicism as sort of like a theological belief system. It's a cultural identity.
Well, you know the famous joke about Northern Ireland, where it's an old joke. So George Bernard Shaw comes to give a talk in Northern Ireland, and he finishes, and someone stands up and says, "Sir, I'm sorry, can you just tell me, are you Catholic or Protestant?" And he says, "No, I'm an atheist." And the guy says, "Well, I don't know that word." And he says, "It means I don't believe in God." And the guy kind of nods, and then he says, "Okay, I get that, but is it the Catholic or the Protestant God that you don't believe in?" Right? And it's like something deep about Northern Ireland, which is where my family is from. And I think also it is something deep about Catholicism. And I know for my dad's generation, right, he grew up in Boston, where kind of a thing on both sides of my family that he married a Protestant and she married a Catholic. Mm-hmm. And that as that has waned, you have to have a reason to go to mass, which is not just to stick it to the Protestants.
Actually, I make that argument all the time. Like one of the interesting things we're seeing is Catholics and Protestants used to hate each other. They don't anymore because now they realize the nuns are the NONES are the real enemy because they're both opposed to us. So it's like, okay, when we were 80% of America, we could hate each other and fight and have all these fun debates and stuff. And now it's like, oh no. All that papism and Mary and all. Nope, not going to worry about that stuff because the real danger is the atheists rising on the other side.
Is that a danger to religion in America?
I think it's an overblown danger. I mean, the share of Americans are atheists is probably 5%, maybe a little bit less, depending on what survey you're looking at. It's not really grown significantly in the last 15 years. It's probably 3% in 2008. Now it's 5%. They get a lot of play, but I also think like the new atheist movement, which for the listeners who are not aware of the new atheist movement, it was like Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, called the Four Horsemen of New Atheism. Like when I was in college in the early 2000s, like people don't realize like when YouTube came out, like you could watch an atheist debate someone for the first time, like over and over. And these guys became famous and atheism started becoming like a thing, like a cultural idea. And a lot of people left religion during, the millennials were really the ones who were like, nah, man, I'm out. But what's funny about new atheism is it's completely out of gas now.
I want to ask that question about religion. There's a famous G.K. Chesterton quote that when people stop believing in Christianity, it's not that they stop believing in anything, it's that they start believing in anything. And yeah. There has been an argument, including from John McWhorter, that the kind of Great Awakening, and this is for listeners who are not familiar with what the Great Awakening is, America has had 4 great religious awakenings, and in which they went from being, a lot of people have a kind of naive idea of religion where we used to be much more religious and then we just got less religious over time, Darwin, et cetera. And there is some truth to that story, to be clear. But it's also that the level of religiosity in America over time has waxed and waned. You've had times of incredible religious revival and fervent, like including when the LDS was founded, and in my grandfather's hometown, Palmyra, New York, in what was known as the burnt over district of New York, because there were so many new faiths springing up there in the 1820s, 1830s. And then it wanes again. And so John McWhorter has argued that and Musa al-Gharbi, I think, to some extent, although I'd have to go back and reread his books, and maybe we should cut that observation out. But that this really is like a religious movement. And I was a little skeptical he wasn't the only person to say this. And I was a little skeptical until I saw people at a Black Lives Matter protest, George Floyd protest during the pandemic, like literally kneeling in front of Black people and begging their forgiveness. And I was like, this does feel like it does feel like it has a bit of a religious character. Like that's such a kind of classic Christian penitential moment. Do you think that's fair, or is that overblown? It's obviously not entirely like a traditional religious faith, right? It does not have a belief in the supernatural, but it does have a very strong orthodoxy, a very strong set of norms, and even some practices in terms of protest and so forth. That you might argue it's a short-lived religion, but then many religions have been short-lived in the history of America. So talk to me a little bit about this. Is this... I'm sure you followed this discourse a bit.
Oh yeah, I get asked the question all the time. Have atheists basically traded religion for politics, right? Like politics has become their religion, and the answer to that question is complicated because it gets into this whole academic debate of like how you define religion, what characteristics does it have to have. I will say this. Atheists are one of the most politically active, quote unquote, religious groups in America. And I'm like, we're not religious. You know what I mean? Like if you're comparing them to like Methodists, yeah, like they're more active than Southern Baptist than an evangelical group. But there's a reason for that. A lot of atheists, actually the average atheist has above average income, above average education. They don't have kids at nearly the rate that Protestants and Catholics do. They're not getting married at nearly the rate Protestants and Catholics are. So guess what they've got? They've got a lot of free time and a lot of money. So what are they going to do with that, right? They're going to go be activists. And so it does make perfect sense from that direction why they would want to engage in politics, because they also see themselves, and this is numerically true, as a minority, position in America. So they need to have their voice sort of heard in the public square. And how do they do that? Well, they do that by marches and protests and activism and all those things. But I will say this, if you really think about American religion, a lot of the things that we do in the American political landscape, actually we crib from American religious groups. Like party meetings come right from denominational meetings, like stump speeches or sermons. Like, so this is why that line is a lot blurrier than people think it is. Like we actually learned how to do politics in America largely by just saying, how does the church run? Let's run it that way. And so that's why I don't think the jump is that big to say like atheists have made politics their religion, because the line between those two things has always been really blurry in America. So it wasn't that big of a deal for them to go from like going to a United Methodist meeting to go into the DNC, annual convention. Those are basically the same thing with just a different goal. So I think the answer is yes, but I also am very, you mentioned how like it burned out really fast. I think we're way past the Great Awakening now. So for whatever it was, if it existed in this weird ecstatic space in America for like 5 or 7 years. But like most revivals, religious or not, had no legs and no permanent change in American society.
What gives a revival legs? Because some of them obviously have had legs.
That is the $1 million question. And the answer is, I don't know, because we've not seen a revival in America in a quantifiable way that had any legs to it. So like I don't have a single example in my lifetime of a revival that actually survived 6, 8, 10 weeks after that moment was over with. So that's what people are like, is this the next Great Awakening? I go, well, here's the problem with the Great Awakenings is we actually don't know what they looked like mathematically speaking. Like we don't have any data at all that really traces how large they were, how they started, how they spread. So I don't know. I always tell people I would love to see a revival just from pure academic curiosity, like what the data would look like, how the trend lines would change. Can we see it before it happens? Like we don't have any frame of reference for what revival looks like in America, because for the last 50 years, it's been nothing but decline across every metric.
So talk about the nuns, which is a quite different story from the atheists, right?
That's so there's a group of people called Nothing in Particular. That's legitimately like the option on the survey. It goes like Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and it goes atheist, agnostic, and then the last option is literally says nothing in particular. And lots of people check that box. And the nuns are atheist, agnostics, and nothing in particular combined. That creates the nuns category. But the nothing in particulars are actually the largest group of the nuns. So if you have 5 nuns in a room, one's an atheist, one's an agnostic, and 3 are nothing in particular. And no one is really thinking about or writing about or conceptualizing these nothing in particulars, but 1 in 5 Americans is nothing in particular. Among Gen Z, it's 1 in 3 of them are nothing in particular. And here's what typifies them. Atheist agnostics have really high incomes and really high education, like good SES by any objective metric. They're doing well in American society. Nothing in particulars are not doing well. They actually have the lowest SES of any. Them and Black Protestants are sort of running neck and neck at the very bottom of the SES spectrum. So, the share of them who have a 4-year college degree and make more than $50,000 a year is less than 20% of them. So like they're a group that's struggling. They're sort of like being left out, left behind, falling behind every year. And yet that's the growing mass of what's changing in American religion. I think they're a group of people who are just disconnected from American life, social life in every possible way. No, not a good education, not attached to religion. And by the way, they're also the least likely to participate in the political process of any religious group. So you can see they're dropping out of everything. And I think we really need to be thinking about what's causing that and how to like reintegrate them into American society, because we know that loners are not good for us as a society, as individuals, spiritually speaking, but that's what we're facing right now.
And so I actually want to talk about that a bit, because you had a recent piece saying that about a third of AA meetings are held in churches.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not just AA, right? It's Cub Scouts. It's all of these different things. If you're in, like my husband's church in Florida, they had a daycare and a gym and all sorts of charitable networks. You talked about when you were younger, a guy showing up to church and getting up in the end of the service when they were doing prayers and saying like, I don't have a job and I don't know how to make rent. And someone found him a job. And all of those things were often mediated through church. It's not the only institution that's failing in a lot of places, right? The Rotaries and the Elks and all of those things, the Little Leagues. There's a lot of institutions that are eroding, but the church is I would argue, the cornerstone. It was the one that was, as you say, the model for the others in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And what's happening? What does that do to places as these churches die?
Yeah. So a post that's upcoming, I looked at polling places in houses of worship, and over 20% of all polling places in America are in houses of worship. In some states,
realize that.
That's crazy, right? In Oklahoma, if you go to a random Oklahoma county, there's a 95% chance that one polling place in the county will be in a church. So it's not just AA, it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, blood drives, polling places. I mean, these churches have become sort of like community hubs for all kinds of not just religious activity, but just civic life. And Putnam wrote about this, by the way, in Bowling Alone, 25 years ago, the collapse and revival of American community. But he traced bowling leagues, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Elks, Moose, VFW. Here's the thing that I think that we need to think about more, though. So his data goes to 2000, and he'd already seen a huge collapse in all those social institutions, right? He blamed it on cable television, because that was like the new medium at the time, was cable television, which sounds so quaint now, right? It's like, oh, that's cute. Yeah. You got 37 channels. Look at this. But whatever he saw, we only have 1,000-fold now, right? With Instagram and TikTok and Netflix and everything else. But here's the thing that people don't think about enough in Putnam's argument, and I think my argument too, is why is the natural state of American society towards social atomization and not social togetherness? Like, why have all the macro level trends been pushing us apart and not drawing us together? That's something I don't have an answer to. So it's like people are like, oh, it's the phones that did all this to us. No. The phones weren't driving people out of bowling leagues in 1975. Like, what happened then is still happening now, just on jet fuel, because we have so many more ways to not be social in social ways, but to like just look at our phones. So the church is, to me, people ask me like, why is the church failing? I go, because social organizations are failing in America. Like, it's not that hard. We can't act like religion at some level is not that much different than the Odd Fellows or the Elks Club. People are not joining things. So why would we think that, oh, they're not going to join anything else but church? People don't work that way. we are moving further and further apart from each other. And I don't want to be like a prophet of doom or whatever, but I really think this is going to be our great undoing, that we don't have third spaces anymore where we just hang out with other people who are different than us. And that's actually making all the problems we're facing that much worse.
Well, let me go back to my brief for the Haredi and the Amish.
Yeah.
One thing that they have that is protective in a way that the LDS does not is that, like, I take your point, and I thought it was really interesting about the size making it harder to maintain these connections. But at the same time, they do have a key difference, which is that they're very, very judicious about how technology enters their lives and their homes. And so, and they also, at least in the case of the Amish, right, they're financially separate. They don't buy insurance. They have all of these. And so, one potential argument that you could say for why has this been happening for so long? Yes, obviously we have better entertainment, and that competes with everything else we might do. It competes with playing canasta. It competes with going to the Rotary meeting. It competes with going to church. But another thing you can say is that we've gotten richer. And as we get richer, we are less dependent on other people for help. We buy things that we used to get. So you have a baby. Now, maybe your people are organizing a meal train and it's great. But if you don't have a meal train, you have DoorDash or you have frozen food, right? We have options that you really needed to have community when you had a baby 70 years ago in a way that you don't. And that's replicated across many, many facets of our lives. We can buy things that we used to use social capital for. And therefore, maybe as we get richer and we don't need those community bonds, maybe we just let them fray. And maybe an argument that the Amish and the Haredi are ultimately going to rule the world because they're the only people still having kids is that they have inserted a backstop that makes that really hard. It makes exit hard, right? The Amish don't go to high school. And that's one reason I think they have great retention. If you stopped in 8th grade, it's very hard to enter the modern American workforce. But also, they don't have all of these contacts that are tempting them into the secular world.
High control religion works for a very small number of people. It's not going to work like on a grand scale. Like if you leave, you're done. We're kicking you out. Like you're completely cut off from the community. And that's why, like, trying to extrapolate from the Amish, like people are like, we could learn something from the Amish. I go, not really. We nostalgize like the Amish. I think there's a lot of people like, I would love to live the Amish lifestyle because of like how like, you don't realize the reality of what the Amish deal with. They wear polyester clothes in 105-degree temperatures. They work with their hands every day. It takes 45 minutes to get to town. Like you can't call someone. They don't have refrigeration. But I think this is what happens is we nostalgize groups we don't fully understand. We think it's always better than what it is. We also do that with the past too, by the way, when it comes to American religion. Sure. There's this great line in Finke and Stark's The Churching of America. They say nostalgia is the enemy of history, which I use all the time. Like we nostalgize history, but like it wasn't actually that way. Like we talked about like how religious America used to be in the 1950s. All objective metrics said that we were very religious. Like attendance was high, affiliation was really high. But you know what we were? We were mainline Protestants in the 1950s. We weren't like dyed-in-the-wool evangelicals. Like they asked Eisenhower, do you think Americans should be religious? And he said, yeah, but I don't care what kind. Like, that's not the, you know what I mean? Like, that's not the kind of evangelicals like nostalgize the 1950s. Like it was this like peak of like American religiosity, but it wasn't the religion they liked. It was a much more like generic, open, pluralistic religion.
So let me ask you, there's been these rumors of a big revival, especially among the Catholic Church. I mean, this is, sort of a thing on the right. And look, I want to talk about the politics of all this in a minute.
Yeah.
But how real? And so that you hear a lot of people saying, no, there's this huge Catholic revival. It's happening. I see it. And like, there are not just these anecdotal reports. There are little green shoots, baptizing more people, getting more priestly vocations. What's your take on all of this?
The Catholic thing is so frustrating to me because like you would figure like their numbers would be more public than what they are, but they're actually published in like this 1,000-page book, like bound book. You have to like get your like ruler out and like go, I'm not doing all that nonsense. Give me a spreadsheet for goodness sakes. Pope Leo, my one plea to you, dude, is like digitize your records. That's all I need in my life. But if you actually look, so there's a group called CARA based out of Georgetown. Like they're the ones who collect the Catholic statistics in America and sort of disseminate them as best they can. If you look at the macro level shifts, I think this puts this all in perspective. So OCIA converts, so adult converts, are up, and they've been up the last couple of years. I think that's a fact. It's pretty undeniable. But the problem is, what's your baseline? Because your baseline is like COVID or post-COVID. That's a terrible baseline for anything at all in the world. And if you look back, let's say, I think they might have had 160 to 180,000 OCIA converts this year nationwide. Not a bad number, but in 2000, that number was 200,000 converts. So like it was high, then it went really low, and now it's kind of rebounding from that very low. So yes, you can have an up, but also in a macro down. And I'll give you an even scarier number for Catholics. They were baptizing in 1965. They baptized almost 1.3 million infants into the church. And last year they baptized about 550,000 infants into the church. So again, to go back to what we talked about, you cannot convert your way out of a retention crisis. These converts are an interesting story, but they're only one part of the whole mosaic of like what's going on in American Catholicism, because the number of kids going to Catholic high schools has dropped in half the last 50 years. You know, we're going to have a huge, in Detroit, Michigan, they're going to have half as many priests as they need in 15 years. Like there's all these metrics that look absolutely terrible for the Catholic Church. And yet some people want to say, but look, you know, OCIA converts are up 30% this year. And it's like, that's great. But how many funerals did the church do? So right. If you look at the whole picture, I just don't see any way for the Catholic Church to be demonstrably larger and more active in America in 20 years than it was 20 years ago. There's nothing in the data that points to that reality. And again, even if convert numbers keep going up, it doesn't change the structural problem the church is facing right now.
So one thing that was really interesting was that to me is that it does look like it's happening among young men, which is not the traditional pattern we're used to, right? Normally, women in, I think, every society are generally more religious than the men. They're more likely to attend services and so forth. I mean, you go back to that fabulous 1950s, like what's the perennial joke in movies and in Norman Rockwell paintings and in television shows? It's mom and the kids trooping off to church while dad slinks around in his bathrobe or goes off fishing.
My favorite Simpsons episode, that's exactly what happens. Homer's like, I'm going to stay at home, and Marge takes the kids, and there's a snowstorm and all this stuff. That's true. Women were the ones who led the kids to church. Men were not leading the household, quote unquote. Yeah.
So why would that change? Has it changed?
So the data on this is really hard to parse. I do think the gender gap, and you described it perfectly, Mike. The data says that consistently women are more religious than men and have been for a very long time. Not a huge difference, like a 3-point difference, depending on what metric you use. But now the gap in Gen Z has basically disappeared. So young men are as religious as young women. And the reason for that, by the way, is not because young men are coming back to church. It's just they're leaving slower than young women are. So the lines are crossing because of that. They're both going down. It's just one's going down faster than the other one. And I think there's a couple answers to that. I think one is that young women are rejecting religion in a way that we've never seen before, largely because of what they see as the culture war issues, like Dobbs, for instance. I've had, many conversations with women saying, I could stomach the church, the Catholic Church, the evangelical church I grew up in. But then whenever my rights were taken away because of the Dobbs decision, who do I blame that on? I blame that on Catholic Supreme Court justices, largely, or evangelical Supreme Court justice, or I blame it on the Republican Party. So why would I want to support an institution that takes my rights away? The idea of like patriarchy. A lot of women say, why would I be part of an organization that says I can't have full access to leadership like the evangelical churches and the Catholic churches? So I think a lot of it was, I think women just kind of got fed up. And by the way, this goes back to what we talked about. Why is the Mainline not like doing gangbusters over this right now? Because hey, become Episcopalian. We'll let you be the whatever you want to be in the Episcopal Church. But they're not like winning the cast-offs. Those women are now becoming nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They're leaving religion behind, because to be liberal in America is to be non-religious, especially among young people. They sort of melded those two ideas in their minds together. Like, you cannot be a Christian and be a progressive. They think those two ideas are incompatible. And by the way, the discourse online is saying more and more of that. You can't be a Christian and vote for Kamala Harris. You heard that a bunch, in the run-up to the 2024 election. So a lot of women say, yeah, guess what? I am a liberal, and that's not going to change. So I guess I have to be non-religious. So I'm leaving. And then men, I think I actually had this young man I was talking, he started going to church. And I was like, this is like, why are you going to church? And he goes, Dr. Burns, I feel like this is one of the only places in America where I don't have to apologize for being a white male. And I thought that was such a telling comment of like, white men are perceiving the reality that the world is not built for them anymore. It does not, I don't even say not, I don't want to use the word privilege, but it does not even like keep them on an equal plane with other people. And guess what the church has always done? It's always elevated white guys to leadership positions. So I think it's both and happening at the same time. And there's crazy data now saying like young women, the gap on politics among young men and young women is the largest of any gender gap we've ever seen. Young women are going further and further to the left, and men aren't going to the right. They're kind of staying in the middle, but because women are keep moving further and further away, that's what's causing that gap to get much larger.
So why did the church get so associated with politics? Whose fault is it? Let's not just be wishy-washy. Well, structural trends. Whose fault is this?
Newton Gingrich. It's all his fault. I blame it on Newt Gingrich. Actually, I did in my last book. I blamed it, at least in part, Newt Gingrich. I think it's actually it's the framers, Megan. That's really who I want to pin this all on, because they created a two-party system. You know, people always ask me,
they didn't
like,
mean to. In their defense.
But they figured it out within like what, 5 years of the ratification. They realized, oh crap, like we effectively have two parties, right? You have to, the system is winner take all. And so I just got asked a couple hours ago, why does Europe not have the God gap like we have in America, where it's like one party is the party of religious people and one party is the party of non-religious people? That's what's happening in America. The reason they don't have it in Europe is two reasons. One, they're not that religious to begin with. You know, like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. You couldn't have a religious party because it'd be like 7 people in a room. But the other reason is because they have multi-parties. They have 6, 7, 8 viable parties. So in America, there's a lot of people in America, a lot of evangelicals, by the way, who are like in favor of raising the minimum wage and in favor of social programs, like government-run health insurance, but they can't support Democrats because they think Democrats are wrong on issues of gender and sexuality and abortion. So they're going to have to like kind of toe the company line. So actually, I do think one of the reasons that politics and religion have become so linked together is the Republican Party has gone out of its way to court religious people and lean into quote unquote values voters. And the Democrats have basically sat around and go, well, who's left? Those are our people. And that's really what politics looks like right now.
So, I mean, let me try to look at this the other way. Right. The Republican Party did go out and try to court those people, but parties always go out and try to court groups of people who have found themselves with a special interest, right? There is no big coalition of voters that's just going to get left lying around, even though I think you and I agree that mixing religion and politics in this way is bad for the church. Forget what it does to our politics.
Yes.
It is bad to have a church where like you need to show your Republican Party card at the door. That is not what church is about.
Correct.
But that, until the 1950s, there were issues that divided churches like the Civil War. But there were not significant issues that put all of the kind of traditionally religious people on one side until you get basically to school prayer. I guess we could argue about the Pledge of Allegiance. And I believe that's 1940. Where I think it was the Jehovah's Witnesses sued to not say the Pledge of Allegiance because they don't take oaths. But people think that the religious right stuff starts with abortion. It doesn't. It starts with school prayer. Mm-hmm. Because until my grandparents would say, I don't understand why we couldn't have prayers. It was fine. No one was offended. I was like, yeah, Grandma, but you lived in a small town where everyone was Christian. Like, yes.
By the way, still even today, most Americans are in favor of like prayers to Jesus in public schools. Like prayer is really popular. The 10 Commandments in classrooms is actually really popular too. No one wants to believe me. The data is overwhelming on this. We're a culturally Christian place, Yeah,
this strikes me as incredibly likely. And so as those issues accumulate and really get going with gay rights, right? I think gay rights is the part where you've just really arrived at an issue that is incommensurable with a reasonably literal, not literalist, not fundamentalist, inerrant word of God. Every single word means exactly like, but if you believe that Paul did indeed write under inspiration, of the Holy Spirit, if you believe that Leviticus was indeed the law handed down by God at Mount Sinai, then you are athwart the gay rights revolution. And abortion, I think we can debate, but like that gay rights is the part where you just can't, it's hard to do a reading around it. And if you are a much less literal mainline denomination, it's easier. But if you are the Catholic Church with 2,000 years of theology hanging around that you need to reconcile with, and if you are just a more literal reader of the Bible, it's challenging. And that's
funny,
the point
though, about Catholics, Megan, is that most Catholics reject the church's teaching on almost everything.
Oh, I know. It's hilarious.
Like that, but that gets people so animated online.
I have questions about this, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, I mean, so for example, like you had that poll question of can you be a faithful Catholic while disagreeing with the church's teaching?
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's like disagreeing is not rejecting in some way, right? There are things where I disagree with the church's teaching, but I also accept it, if that makes sense, right? Where,
but
like,
do you live your life based on the church's teaching or your own understanding?
Most of these are not things that affect my life personally, I will say.
I get it.
Right.
But even stuff like going to mass and going to confess, like the share of Catholics who go to mass like once a week and go to confession once a year is 17%. Like there's like the idea that Catholicism is like this belief system is like sociologically false. It's a social group that has beliefs tacked on the side, and all the tradcasts are mad about that. Like they want to believe that Catholicism, if I measured it the right way, would be as fervent and as conservative as evangelicalism is, and it is not.
No, sure, but granted, but the institution of the church is not going to change its mind.
Oh, no.
Or not quickly. The church has changed its mind on many things, but it's not going to happen in 2 minutes because the culture changed, right?
Oh,
and so no,
female priests aren't going to happen. Yeah.
What?
Female priests are not going to happen in our lifetime. Absolutely not.
I think that is correct. Married priests are more likely than female priests.
Absolutely right, yeah.
And like in that circumstance, yeah, of course they're going to end up all on one side in the same way that teachers ended up on one side and the NRA has ended up on one side, right? When you've got an issue that's binary and where there's a lot of conflict, like traditionally religious people are going to all end up in the conservative camp, even if they disagree on all sorts of things, wars, abortion, whatever, like not abortion, but like on other things, immigration, all sorts of issues, they're going to end up in the conservative camp.
And this is an important point to make to the audience. Like we used to believe that religion was first and politics was second. Like you thought like, well, who would Jesus vote for? Then you voted for that person, right? But the more data that's coming out the last 10 years or so, we think that that's the opposite now. Like politics is first and religion is downstream of politics. So like, do I go to church? What kind of church do I go to? How often do I go to church? Is basically a political question now, not a theological question, because you see it sorting out. Like I was talking to a friend the other day and she goes, I read the whole Bible and I don't find anything in there that says we have to let anyone come into our country. We really shouldn't even care about immigrants. And I was like, well, that's an interesting interpretation of the Bible because I think I can point you some like, but the thing is like, you can't see what you don't want to see. If you're in your politics have become blinders, and the left does this too, by the way, like they find a way to sort of explain away the verses about homosexuality or the verses about abortion or the verses about this, that, because they want to justify their own political positions with their religious beliefs. And that to me is the most tragic thing of all is when you say, well, of course, tariffs are the God ordained way to do economic systems in a multi-party, like, what are you talking about?
I remember Jesus's incredibly moving words on tariffs and industrial policy.
I know we can talk about principles, but when you say like Jesus would clearly like favor one policy or another, what you've done is you've created politics as your religion. And to
going back to our earlier thread.
Exactly right. I just think it becomes deeply problematic when we start saying that the Bible clearly supports one specific type of 2026 policy on Iran or tariffs or health insurance or whatever it is. I think, and this is the pastor me coming out, I just wish more people would have like sort of foundational principles about what they think is good and true and right and what we should seek for people, as opposed to, well, whatever my political party tells me we should believe is what we should believe. And I think that's like, to me, the thing that kills me is the Republican Party used to be sort of like a more interventionist party, then it became an isolationist party, and now it's an interventionist party because the guy who leads the party's changed everyone's mind. Like, what is wrong with having principles that say, I don't care what's happening in this situation, this is how Christians respond to things like this? And I think this is the problem that we face, is because it's all downstream of politics now. Not the preachers don't matter. I hate to say, as a guy who was a preacher for 18 years, we don't matter as much as what they're consuming through Fox News or podcasts or Joe Rogan or whatever it is. And therefore, people are being blown to and fro by the political winds of the day, as opposed to being sort of rooted in some deep religious principle, which, by the way, I don't care what it is. It's a deep religious principle they really hold to. Because I'm a pluralist, Megan. Come on, I'm a pluralist.
I'm also a pluralist, but it is funny because, like, ultimately, if you're the member of a faith, like, you have committed to a specific idea of what is true about the world.
What's a crazy idea, right? Like, you actually believe in something eternal that like goes beyond the whims of the day, that guides your thoughts and behaviors and votes. Like, what a crazy idea. But like, that's what I want to believe in, that idealistic world. But the more I look at the data, the more I go, man, we're all just figuring it out from one day to the next.
So one thing that worries me about this is that it's given rise to a kind of paranoid style on politics. And one thing that I think about a lot is that there was a big fad for Christian nationalism on the left. And you had a great chart on this a while back, where you were like, everyone on the left knows what Christian nationalism is. Do you know who doesn't know what Christian nationalism is? Religious conservatives.
Yeah.
Who have never heard of it.
Yeah.
And I think there is, right, like there is a paranoia on the right. I don't think, in either case, I don't think it's entirely unfounded, right? It really was true that there were people who wanted to shut down Christian religious institutions that wouldn't toe the line on gender, sexuality, etc. And it also really is true that there are churches, I mean, David French talks about this with his own church and other churches, that have confused republicanism with Christianity. But there's also people looking at this and they're like, these people are going to destroy America. They are going to destroy me. And I don't think that there's actually like either the institutional will or the certainly the political support for either of those things.
Yeah. But that's the Christian nationalism debate is so frustrating to me, because like I have data on this, like tracking Christian nationalist views over time. Like, do you think the America should be declared as a Christian nation? Should we advocate for Christian values? And the data says that those values, those beliefs have gone down over the last 15 years, like pretty consistently. But if I put that on social media, the response is so interesting, because it says, yeah, but then why in the halls of power has it only gone up the last 15 years? That's what the left will say. And then the right will say, yeah, because Christian nationalism is a boogeyman created by the left to smear Christians with this label. Like, it's become a political football as opposed to like a sociological term that has any like weight to it, like in merit to it. And that's unfortunately what's happening more and more, is the left and the right have sorted themselves out so much. They already have their talking points in their head. And I'll even tell you this, there was a fascinating poll that Ohio State just did about Christian nationalism. They did this hybrid style where they asked Christian nationalist statements. And when people said they agreed that America should advocate for Christian values, then they had an AI follow-up that said, what do you mean by Christian values? And they got to write in a box what it was. And you know what most of it was? It was like, I wish they would stop slinging mud at each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like advocating for the end of abortion or, you know, the end of same-sex marriage or like 10 commandments in public schools. It was very much like, we just want our politicians to not be idiots and jerks. That's what they thought Christian values were. So even like what those words mean is not what we think they mean. And what's funny is when even that results of that poll came out, all the leftists were like, well, of course, you know, like still 2% of Americans are real Christian nationalists and all this stuff. So no matter what I do as a data analyst, you cannot convince people who are convinced of their position to change their mind. They're just going to find a way to bob and weave and like take that data and not make it matter. Like, that's the sad reality of what we do, is we're not actually in search of truth here. We're in search of data that backs up our opinions. And I think that to me is, gosh, I hate to be like this pie in the sky Pollyanna guy, but like that to me is the biggest casualty of this whole, the truth. Like, we've
So
lost
is there
our
any
ability
way
to
out
search
of
for the truth.
this? Is there any sign that we might be stumbling somewhere near a way out of this?
Well, we're closer to the rapture today than we've ever been in American history, so that's always a good out, right?
That is a comfort.
I actually deeply believe in the ability of the American people to find the center on things. Like, I wrote about this in my last book. Like, there's a chapter called "Are we as really polarized as we think we are?" And the answer is no, not really. Like, at the elite level we are, but at like the rank and file level we're not. Like, you ask people questions about abortion. Like, there's this Tricia Bruce did this great study at Notre Dame where she interviewed like 45-minute interviews of 220 people about abortion. She asked them questions to begin the interview and then asked them the same questions to end the interview, and they gave totally different answers to the abortion questions the second time versus the first time. And she pointed that out, and they go, yeah, I guess I just don't really know what I believe about abortion. Like, they want to find a reasonable, sensible middle path on things like abortion, on things like religious pluralism. Like, if you look at the data, Americans are actually super cool with other religious groups. Do you think that, Muslim women should be able to wear a hijab when they get their driver's license picture taken? Like, 80% of Americans are like, yeah, fine, whatever you want to do. It's just the loudest voices are driving us apart. We've survived. We've survived everything thrown at us as a country. The revolution, the Civil War, Reconstruction, 2 world wars, a Great Depression, 9/11, the Civil Rights Movement. If we can survive all that stuff, the fact that we don't like each other very much, like, if that takes us down, like, we were never as cool as we thought we were. And I just have an abiding sense that, like, Americans will figure it out because we've figured out everything we faced so far. So I am generally optimistic about the future.
Amen. That is usually my last question, but you just answered it. So, Ryan, this was awesome. I enjoyed this so much. I know I'm asking you a lot of questions you've been asked before, but you
I like
were
it,
a
though.
star, and this was a really fun interview for me. So
Well, it's been
I
a
hope
lot
you
of
enjoyed
fun.
it as well.
I really did. I usually don't enjoy podcasts. That's why I say no to most of them again. But this was lively.